Up now, we have Dr. Justin Thompson. He's a researcher at BEG, and he is here today to talk to us about some data projects that they have at the BEG that hopefully will be useful for districts and other groundwater users going forward. So please join me in welcoming Justin to the stage.
All right. Somebody got my slides loaded in the back there? I know there was kind of a change here. Hey, there we go. All right. Well, howdy. Good morning, everybody. So I'm Justin Thompson. I'm an assistant research professor at the Bureau of Economic Geology. I don't have any jokes about string or any references to cats like Robert, but I'm really excited to be here to talk about this today, and I think maybe you'll find this interesting too. I do want to actually echo Brian. As a research professor, part of my job is knowledge sharing, so I travel all over conferences and summits and whatnot, and I really want to echo Brian to say that this is actually really one of my very favorite conferences that I go to. It's well organized, the people are great, these are the stakeholders I really want to reach the most, so thank you so much for having me here, and thank you everyone who organizes this. I'm going to take a quick minute and introduce the Bureau a little bit, because some of y'all know us, but unfortunately some of y'all don't know us that well. So BEG, Bureau of Economic Geology. Well, who are we? What do we do? We are the oldest and one of the largest research units at the University of Texas at Austin. So we're a part of UT Austin, but we're kind of a special critter, right? Because we're also the State Geological Survey of Texas, right? So some of you may have heard of USGS, right? U.S. Geological Survey. We are USGS, but for Texas, right? All the state surveys, all the states have a state survey, and we are that for Texas. We do a lot of applied research. We generate a lot of new data. We're sort of famous for a lot of our maps, right? So a lot of the geologic maps of Texas, we do a lot of that work through federal and state programs. We have a very long, accomplished history in the oil and gas field, but we also have a strong environmental and particularly, hydro program at the Bureau. Something I'm really excited about, we are all excited about at the Bureau, kind of leaning into our role as the State Geological Survey, we've recently launched a series of sort of large-scale, multi-year projects that really focus on serving needs in the state of Texas. And we're calling that our Texas Imperative Projects. We've got 4 right now. There's one looking at geothermal, there's another one looking at critical minerals, there's one looking at non-hydrocarbon gases, so that's like helium and hydrogen. And then the 4th one is my project that I'm leading on water. And that's actually what I'm really excited to talk to y'all about here today. I was looking at the agenda and I thought, man, some of these snappy talk titles, I should have come up with something, more fun and engaging, but here we are. We're still at the point where we're just kind of call things what they are. This project, for now, we're calling our Texas Hydrologic Systems and Drought Project. This is, again, a large-scale, multi-year project, and we kind of have 3 key phases that we're trying to accomplish with this. First, we want to synthesize the available data that we have out there into actionable information. And this is what I'm going to talk really about today, so we'll get into more detail on that in just a second. And then once we have all of that data, the second thing we want to do is evaluate our hydrologic systems for drought impacts, right? How does our hydrology actually respond right when the rain shuts off? And then once we've kind of got a better understanding of that, what we want to do is assess drought risk and resilience, right, to specific infrastructure and user groups and things like that. So these are kind of the 3 big phases of this project, but like I said, today I'm really just going to focus on this first one, talking about synthesizing our data into actionable information. Okay, so what are we talking about here? So what's the challenge? Y'all, honestly, Texas water data is abundant. Now, don't get me wrong. I mean, I'm a good scientist. We always need more data. And truthfully, we do, right? There's gaps and scarcity in some places. But when you look around, right, compare us to other states and even other countries around the world, we actually have a lot more water data than most folks could ever dream of having. The challenge is that it's siloed, it's disparate, and it's raw. Now that first part, siloed, the folks at the board are doing a fantastic bang-up job of kind of trying to resolve that with the water data hub that Brian mentioned a second ago. But it's still disparate, it's still raw, right? When you think about water data, right, what all could that be? Well, it takes all forms, right? You've got groundwater, right, where you've got hydrogeology, you've got well infrastructure, you've got water levels. When you think about surface water, we've got stream gauges, we've got reservoir storage. And then we've got, precipitation. Oh, it rained X many inches this week, this month, et cetera. And then another one that I think is really important and doesn't get talked about as much, soil water, right? How much water is in the soil, right? So we've got all these different, stations, and we've got satellite data overhead, we've got, GAMs and WAMs and all these things, but it's disparate, right? It's challenging to try to put that together into something that's useful. So that's kind of the opportunity here, in my opinion. What we can do is we can transform the available data, and I do mean available, right? We're not talking about going out and creating new data, putting new stations out, but just taking everything that's out there today and gather it all together, synthesize it into a common framework, gap fill it, because we know a lot of these data are incomplete, right? There's gaps here and there, add some value to it, and then ultimately deploy it to an online portal. That's the opportunity. And this is an idea, I'm really so excited to be here to talk about this. This is an idea that we've been talking about with various stakeholders for about 8 years now. And about 8 years ago, the idea was there, the impetus was there, but the technology really wasn't yet. We were getting close, but 8 years ago, we couldn't quite do it. Now we can, right? The technology is here, right? The tools are available. So, that's exactly what we're doing. We're starting by gathering all available water data for the state of Texas. And when I say all, I mean all. I'm talking about surface water data, those gauges and reservoirs, et cetera. I'm talking about groundwater, right? I'm talking about monitoring wells. I'm talking about GAMs. I'm talking about hydrostratigraphy. I'm talking about soil water. I'm talking about precipitation. I'm talking about evapotranspiration, right? We're really focused on the hydrology, but also we know we have to pair that with other useful information that y'all might need, right? So we're talking about things like infrastructure. Where are the groundwater wells? How deep are they? Where's the screen, right? Talking about planning data, right? What is the state and regional water plans thinking about doing, right? All of that kind of stuff. So we're gathering all of that data together and kind of synthesizing it, right? So I mentioned evapotranspiration here. I've got this pictured. So this is evapotranspiration. So just for clarity, that's the water vapor, right, that gets released up into the atmosphere, both through evaporation and then the transpiration of plants, right? Check this out. Have you ever thought about this? You ever look at this? Anybody ever realized before that, you see those reds in East Texas? That's indicating that and hear me out, each square mile that's red like that is evapotranspirating up to 400 acre-feet of water per month. I've never heard evapotranspiration characterized in those terms before, right? This is the kind of insights that we're hoping to get into. So what does this mean, synthesize into a common framework? Well, so the first thing we're doing is we're doing statewide coverage. That actually wasn't originally the plan. We were going to do a sort of a limited study area. Few people have heard about this. We were looking at the hill country. And then we were very fortunate to get a small tranche of funding from the legislature this last session. And so now we've expanded this to statewide coverage. So what are we talking about? Well, imagine, and I don't know if y'all can see it real well in the back or whatnot, but imagine, if you will, the entire state subdivided into 1 square mile points. So for every 1 square mile in the state of Texas, you've got a point that's latitude, longitude coordinated that has a whole bunch of water data attached to it, right? That's the kind of framework. And you can kind of see, that's kind of what I've got pictured here, right up in the top right. Each one of those little circles is a 1 square mile point. And that's actually showing you real data. This is kind of, you can see Travis and Williamson County there. And down below is what that MODIS data looks like, that evapotranspiration data looked like in the slide before. But if you zoom in, right, a little bit further, you get down to this 1 square mile dots. That's the framework that we're working toward, the spatial framework, 1 square mile, entire state of Texas. We're also looking at a monthly time step because, you know, water is temporal, right? Things are changing over time. Water flows, water moves. So we have to put all of this into a temporal framework. This is still TBD, but right now we're looking at a monthly time step to show you all of this data. Now, that said, I'll kind of come back to this in a minute. We'll retain all of this sort of native resolution, but right now we're thinking monthly. So I kind of already, yeah, so right here. So, you know, maybe you're interested in rainfall and you want those millimeters. Maybe that's what you need. Okay, well, we're going to keep that, but our real goal is to put everything together into volume frameworks at the same time step. So you can look at it all together, right, and see, okay, precipitation was this, you know, evapotranspiration was this, groundwater was this, and so on. And it's all in the same units and the same time step, so you can look at it all together holistically. Okay. What are we trying to do here? Well, we're trying to add value, essentially, right? We're trying to improve access, but also add value. We know that a lot of data have gaps. They have spatial gaps. They have temporal gaps. Well, we intend to fill those, right, using the best available methods. Another value add point here is we know we have a lot of station data, right? So we're talking about things like TexMesoNet, right, that the board runs, right, Texon, Soil Moisture Network. We have a bunch of monitoring network data in the state of Texas that if you go out and you pull the best available data set for that kind of water right now, that station data that we in the state of Texas have invested in isn't in it, right? It's not, those stations, their data is not reflected in some of these, you know, common data sets that you see. So our intention is to say, well, hey, we've got on-the-ground good station data. Let's integrate that into these data sets that people are working with. And then, you know, we're not trying to reinvent the wheel here. We're trying to improve access. So we're going to fully leverage these models that the state has already spent many years and many millions of dollars building, right? So, for example, the groundwater availability models for groundwater and the surface water availability models for surface water. There's a whole bunch of really valuable information and data in those that we can kind of extract and provide in a more accessible manner. And again, I kind of touched on this a second ago. The idea is to provide value by uniting all of this available data, not just the different forms of water, because, look, I'm a hydrologist, and you know, a lot of y'all are water practitioners. We understand water is a system. Right? It's all connected, right? You talk about surface water, groundwater, soil moisture. Well, it's all part of the same system. So we want to unite all of that hydrology, but not just the hydrology. We want to bring in, like I said a second ago, the infrastructure, right? Political issues, right? So, and I say political, I just mean things like, where are the groundwater districts, right? Where's the public water system boundaries, right? What's the planning, right? That kind of thing. So then once we've got all this data, what are we going to do with it? Well, we're going to deploy it to an online public-facing portal. I say portal, call it a dashboard, call it a website. I don't really care, right? It's kind of the same thing. But the key here is that what we're envisioning is more than just maps, right? What I will not do is just cough up a bunch of maps onto the internet for y'all, wash my hands and say, okay, job done, we did it. I don't think that's quite good enough, and that's not what we're going to do here. Our goal, our vision here is to provide an online portal that has a sort of a guided, visualized user experience, right? So imagine, and this is a long way off, I'll come to that in a second on the roadmap slide, but imagine you go to this online portal and you come to a landing page and you see some cool whiz-bang data for the state of Texas, right? But then, oh my gosh, there's so much here, I'm overloaded, where do I go next? Well, the idea is to provide a kind of a guided experience where you can say, well, I'm really interested in groundwater, for example, right? And then the portal will kind of guide you through some groundwater information. Or maybe you say, I'm interested in a particular location. I'm interested in Bexar County, right, for example. Well, okay, so the portal can take you to Bexar County and then guide you through the various information that's available for Bexar County. We're looking at time series and trends, right? This is, I think, really valuable. I kind of skipped over it a second ago. For right now, we're assembling all of this data for 2010 through 2024 inclusive, right? For the entire state of Texas. So what we can do with that is give you some time series. You say you're interested in Bexar County. Say you're interested in soil moisture in Bexar County. Well, we can give you a time series of showing you how soil moisture has changed over that time period in Bexar County, right? So time series and trends. Another really important piece of this, we don't want to, again, kind of duplicate effort. So, if you're just interested in that original millimeter precipitation data from, the Weather Service or whoever, we're not going to put that on this site for you to download because you can already get that somewhere else. And if you're really interested in the native data, you could go to the Water Hub and find that right away. But what we will make sure we have on here is all of the data that we have processed and added some value to. Not only can you see it, you can download it from us as well so that you can go and work with that data however you might need. So imagine again, say I'm interested in Bexar County, or I want to draw a box on a map. And then bloop, okay, here's all the available data that we have hosted here that you can download for your area of interest. And then off to the races you go. Of course, right, we understand that there's a lot of potential uses for this kind of data, so we want to make sure that we provide sort of full methods documentation on how we've processed this data, what we've done with it, right, how we've, say, for example, generated a water level or something like that, right? So that, again, we're scientists, we want everything to be fully reproducible, and again, for our stakeholders, we want everything to be fully transparent. Okay, so you might be asking yourself, all right, what's the value of this? Well, I kind of touched on part of it already. The holistic hydrology. Again, as a scientist, I think that's incredibly valuable. And we've never really had something like this before, certainly in the research environment, where we can look at all forms of water over a time period in the same framework and system. Right? For our purposes in our project, what that's going to allow us to do is really dig deep on drought impacts to our hydrologic systems. But you could imagine, right, that there's all kinds of additional applications that y'all or other researchers or whomever, right, state agencies could get out of this. So it's a holistic hydrology. You get to see the whole picture of the water system all at once. Another huge piece of value here, and I think in particular for this audience, is pre-processed high-resolution information, right? So I heard Dr. Teague yesterday when she was asked, if you were king for a day, what were some of the things that you would do? And she made a comment, and I'm paraphrasing, I don't remember exactly how she put it, but she said something to the effect of, well, I would really like to see more data made more accessible and more available to folks. Well, that's a big part of what this is intended to do, right? So, imagine, there's groundwater availability model data online right now, right? But you need somebody with time and expertise to process that data into something you can use, right? Just download it, and it's just a geodatabase, right? Oh, geez, what do I do with that? I don't know. I need somebody with GIS skills to do something with that. Well, we're doing that for you, basically. Right? We're going to pre-process all of that available data into that 1 square mile resolution that's just ready for you to kind of run with. Right? So that's a big piece of it. I think and I hope that you can use that data to help with your decision making. Right? If you're talking about, I don't know, permitting or planning, et cetera, I'm hoping that you and other stakeholders across the state can use that to support your decision making processes. And of course, as I already kind of mentioned, it's research support, right? This provides a foundational level of information that we can build on to then go and answer additional questions. Kind of to that note, my real hope here, again, is not to duplicate any effort or reinvent any wheels, but to actually provide some efficiency, right? So imagine if we at the Bureau had provided this foundational level data, well, then that could hopefully provide a stepping stone for, let's say, if you're hiring your consultancies to do a study on a particular issue of interest in your district. Well, the hope here is that, hey, they have this data set provided by Bureau and kind of ready to go, pre-processed, that they don't then have to spend that time kind of just laying that level one. They can just dive right in to that more specific question that you have interest in, right? And similarly, right, there's public synergies too, right? Our sister state agencies have needs for some of this data, and then kind of go in the other direction too, right? The intention here is not for this to be a one and done, we build it, we throw it up there, and then we let it kind of just, you know, rot into eternity. The hope and idea here is that this is something that we can kind of keep updated as time goes on. So for example, if you've got a new groundwater availability model coming out that the Water Development Board is finishing up, right? Well, the hope would be that we take the old model that we had processed and put available, right? And replace that with the new one, right? Kind of keep it live, right? And the other piece of this is on a similar wavelength. I said we're going to do 2010 to 2024. Part of the reason we want to do that is because, like I said, for our research purposes, we're interested in drought. And of course, we want to capture that, you know, 2011 and 2014 drought and then post-drought conditions. Excuse me. But what we could do, potentially in the future, if there's interest, is we could turn this into sort of a near-time or real-time product too. That as data is coming available every day from your stream gauges, from your text mesonet, et cetera, it's you know, immediately imported into this dashboard. That's something that we could do. That's not a plan right now, but it's definitely a possibility. Obviously, public education outreach, right? I mentioned that this portal, right, will be a public-facing portal, right? For better or for worse, right? I think as a scientist, and certainly as the Bureau, right, it's our mission to improve access to the information that's out there, right? So hopefully this tool could help in your sort of public education and outreach efforts, right? You can just, you know, as you're explaining something that's going on maybe in your district, you can pull data from this portal or even point your public to the portal to go look and explore themselves. And then finally, I keep kind of touching on this, I think it's really important to help people understand the difference between climatological and hydrological drought, right? I had a slide in here before and I kind of took it out because I thought I was short on time. Turns out I'm not. But, you know, the public largely, and even some of our stakeholders here today, when you think about drought, you probably think of those drought indexes, right? Those maps, right? And you see the yellow and the red and the orange and everything, right? And that's a useful tool, but it has a problem in my opinion, right? Because what happens is you see the map and it's dark red, we're in bad drought, things are bad. And then what happens? It rains, right? And then I think I checked it like a couple weeks ago. This is exactly the situation right now. It rains. And then you go check that drought index map, and suddenly the map is white, or maybe a couple dashes of yellow, and everybody says, hooray, we're out of drought. Well, we're out of climatological drought, but is that really helpful when, let's say, you're up in the high plains, and your primary water source is the Ogallala, right? And your monitoring wells are just showing this trend line. There's no huge up spike from when it rained and suddenly the map turned, you know, white and yellow again, right? So there's a disconnect, right, between a lot of public perception in drought and hydrologic drought, right? What's really driving our water resources. So that's a big piece of the value here to me. Okay, so what are we talking about? So roadmap, timeline. Okay, so first of all, like I said, this is something that we've been talking about for 8 years. We've been working on this very quietly for the better part of a year. Some of y'all have hinted at this for a little bit. I didn't want to talk too much about it publicly until we had a little bit of progress behind us. And I will say, I did speak a little bit about this at the Texas Water Research Network meeting some time ago, but y'all, this is the first more public stakeholder conference that I have said anything about this project. So I'm really pleased to sort of debut this for you here. So where are we at? Right now we're in that phase of data gathering and synthesis. It sounds really simple. Hey, yeah, just collect all the data in the state and, synthesize it together. In reality, it's really complicated. It's really complicated. And it's certainly difficult to do in any kind of rigorous manner that people can put some trust in. So we've been working on that for the better part of a year. We still have some work to do, but we are making good progress. We are finalizing some data sets right now. I showed a few slides back the water level DFC projections for, I think I put up the Carrizo sand for GMA 12. Right, so for example, right now we're in the process of running all the GAMs for all of y'all's DFCs for the last planning process, right? So we're about halfway done with that already. And we've got precipitation data and soil moisture data and so on and so on. So right now, we're gathering the data and synthesizing it. Where do we go next? Well, as I mentioned, our plan at the Bureau is to really look at drought impacts, risk, and resilience. I know that flood is kind of a hot topic of discussion right now, and okay, rightly so. But flood and drought, those are the two prime movers of water in Texas, and we can't forget about drought, y'all. I know I'm preaching to the choir on that, but it's really easy to forget about the slow onset monster, to borrow a word that was used in some recent legislative hearings. It's easy to forget about and ignore the slow onset monster and focus on the short-term, high-impact monster. But we can't forget about drought. So that's kind of what we're going to work on there, is look at how drought impacts the hydrologic systems. And then based on that, and it's really, honestly, that's a whole other talk. We can talk about that, a year or so from now. Really fascinating stuff. Machine learning, very fancy kind of stuff. But we want to ultimately use all of that understanding to understand what is the risk to our water resource infrastructure and systems, right? So we're talking about groundwater wells and public water supplies and reservoirs. And then what's the resilience, right? How well can those systems bear those impacts? I'll give you kind of a little quick teaser on this. One thing that we're really interested in looking at is not just historical drought, but prospective drought, right? We plan in the state of Texas for drought of record, right? And there's a lot of good reason to do that. But what if we have a drought that's deeper or longer than the drought of record, right? What happens then? Well, that's kind of one of those things that we're interested in looking at with this research program, is to say, okay, what if we had some hypothetical drought scenarios based on all these gobs of data that we have? How do we think our hydrologic systems might respond to a drought that looks like that? Like I said, that work, the drought work, is still some time in coming. We kind of had a bit of a direction change, a bit of a pivot when we got that funding from the ledge and pivoted to statewide coverage. So we're really focused for the next year or so on this statewide coverage of this portal, this information. And that's about where we're at. It's going to be probably about a year before this portal is online and available to the public. We're making great progress on putting all the data together, but to really build the platform that we have envisioned, A, it's very expensive, and B, it takes a lot of time, right? We have to do a lot of user interface, user design kind of things to make sure that we build something that's actually accessible and useful to folks. Possibilities, I kind of already hinted at some of this. We could, as I said, right now, 2010, 2024 inclusive. Every bit of data that we can get for that whole time period will be there. We could, if there was interest, expand that historical time frame, right? If we wanted to put additional data up there that goes further back, that's something we could do. It's worth noting, however, that part of the sort of opportunity of looking at 2010 to 2024 is that we have, as you know, like increasingly valuable new data products. Think of like satellites and things that we didn't have in 2000 or 1990 or something like that. So bearing in mind that the further back you go, the less data you have, sometimes the less quality data you have. But that's something we could do if there's interest. We could expand that time frame backwards. And then as I kind of mentioned before, it's kind of another endeavor altogether, but if there were interest and if the public and our stakeholders are really seeing a lot of value and utility out of this platform, we could make it real time. Well, near time is kind of the word we use. It's very difficult to do anything truly real time, but close enough, right? Where we could make this thing, ingest automatically those river gauges and weather stations and all of that kind of stuff. Again, if there's interest. Okay, so I've just been standing up here yammering at you a bit, and hopefully it's interesting to you, but you may be asking yourself, well, how does this involve me other than hopefully the benefit I get out of it? How can you get involved? Well, so first and foremost, I come to conferences like this, and I go to the talks, and I listen to what everybody is saying, but honestly, by all means, if there's things that y'all are particularly interested in that you'd like to see get incorporated into something like this, let us know. Right, I heard, for example, discussion yesterday about sand thickness mapping. And I said, oh, okay, wait a minute, that's something I hadn't thought about. That's something that we could integrate in this. The thoughts that I had previously was monitoring well data. All right, we have, obviously we have access to the monitoring wells that the Water Development Board does for us, but we know that a lot of y'all districts out there have your own monitoring well data, right? It would be fantastic if we could get that data integrated into this portal as well. So if that's something y'all are interested in, let us know. We'd be really keen to do that. As I mentioned a second ago, we're running right now all of your GAMs with your last DFC run. But it's really difficult for us to know for sure if we've done it correctly, right? We've got your GCD-wide averages of drawdown, for example, and we can kind of use that as a benchmark. But if, for example, some of y'all have worked with your consultancies and you still have some of the output data from your GAM runs for your last planning period, we'd love to check our math against yours and make sure we're doing it right. That'd be super valuable. A lot of discussion here and in the past about regional and local models, right? Where, say, the GAMs don't do a very good job characterizing XYZ. We need, something better to accomplish this specific objective. So we've invested a lot of time and money building a local or a regional model. Y'all, we're happy to integrate those. Our goal here is to put out there the best available information. But of course, we don't own or necessarily have public access to some of y'all's regional models. So we'd be very interested in kind of integrating those into this work as well. So if that's something you're interested in, let us know. And then, of course, kind of once we get a little closer to launching this thing, we're not going to just, hit the streets cold with it. We're going to want to test this, right, and make sure folks can use it and that it makes sense to them and they're getting value out of it. So if you're interested in kind of being one of those cohorts that helps us test this thing and kind of, give us some feedback, we'd be really keen for you to do that as well. Okay. Well, I'm sorry, Adam. I'm right at 30 minutes, which is what I was planning, but I think we do have some time for Q&A? Yep. I'm really happy to answer any questions you've got. My contact info. Oh, I thought I put my phone number. Maybe I didn't. I'm very Googleable. Justin Thompson, Bureau of Economic Geology. You'll find all my contact info. But that's my email address. I'm really keen to answer any questions you have right now, but if you're a little shy and you don't want to ask in front of 500 people, I get that. You can email me later, and happy to talk about it. In kind of closing, like I said, this is something that I'm really, really excited about. We've been talking about for 8 years. We've been working on it for the better part of a year. And I'm really hoping that this has some real value and impact for y'all. So, any questions? Yes, I see one in the back. And these lights are bright.
Hi, I'm Jevin Harding from the Texas Water Development Board. So we've chatted, or you've chatted with some of the people there. I have a question about accessibility and longevity, and I'm sure you've kind of thought about this. So at the board, we have dedicated staff and funding for not only compiling and serving up the information, but then also handling all the updates as technology goes and everything. So does BEG have a mechanism to continue that support? And I, have run into paywalls trying to access some old BEG research, right? So once the funding for this particular project is done, maybe you have funding to serve it publicly, but then it goes behind a paywall after that.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So I hear kind of two main pieces of that, and I want to address them separately. It is true that some of our reports and maps and things have been behind a paywall. I am a lowly assistant research professor. I do not have the authority to kind of speak to that, but what I will tell you is there has been a lot of discussion at the Bureau recently about, can we do something about that to make these resources that go way back more accessible to folks? And so that's my quick little blurb about paywalls, and stay tuned on that. We'll see what the directors think, right? The second part of your question, longevity and maintenance. So the honest truth is we're kind of seeing where this takes us. So the honest truth is that we, at the Bureau, we do get some funding from the state legislature, but not for water, right? It's for oil and gas for the most part. I mentioned earlier in the talk that we did get a small tranche of funding specifically to support this program, but it's a one-time thing, right? It's not a recurring line item. I'm not sure what the long-term maintenance and update plan for this is. My hope is that we build this, we show that it has value, that people want it, that people use it, and then we leverage that experience to go seek what we need to keep it going, keep it updated, et cetera. But at the same time, I think that's not necessarily a bad model, because if let's say we build this and nobody really wants it or is using it, which God, I hope not, but if that were to happen, then hey, we're not committed, right, to kind of maintaining this, ad infinitum, right? So we're gonna launch it, we're gonna put it up, and it'll be available for at least a few years, I guess, and then we'll kind of just see where it goes from there. Does that answer your question? Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. I see another. Is that Mani? I can't see.
Thank you, Justin. This was very interesting. I was thinking from the research point of view, that can increase productivity a lot because you know how much time goes to putting all this data together, cleaning it. So that would be greatly beneficial. Now, one thing I was thinking, you mentioned this pixel level data. I was thinking if you're also trying to, or thinking about incorporating some of the decision-making units, let's say parcel boundaries that are associated with land use changes. Working with the Colorado data, one thing that I appreciated, they had very good water rights data. So for example, we could see junior rights and senior rights respond very differently to droughts. And when we think about risk and resilience, so those things matter a lot on who is resilient and who is not. So I think those decision-making and administrative type of data could also be very helpful on top of this. I wonder what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so two things. One, you're absolutely right. I mean, right? You're in the research world. I've heard it commonly quoted that your average research scientist in natural sciences can spend up to 80% of their time just wrangling data. Just putting it together, harmonize, whatever, pre-processing, blah, 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 before they ever get to the point where they're actually running some kind of calculation to answer a question. Up to 80% of their time is used on that kind of stuff. So exactly to Mani's point, the hope here is that we kind of alleviate a big part of that 80%, right? Secondly, so you talk about water rights and those kinds of data. This is kind of what I was saying before, and this is kind of still evolving on what all we intend to put into the portal or not. We're mostly focused on the hydrology, because that's kind of our bag. But this is kind of a big part of what we were talking about leveraging the GAMs and the WAMs, right? So again, we've got these models and tools that the state has built that do things like tell us where the water rights are, who's senior to whom, right? If the flows are X, then who gets, volume Y. All of that data has already been built, right? So we could, and in a general sense here, are kind of making all of that available in this framework. Right, exactly. So it can, again, help inform some of those decision-making processes and research objectives. Yeah, absolutely. Am I out of time, Adam? Yeah. Is it lunchtime? Y'all ready to eat? Thank you.
Let's give Justin another round of applause.